we're here to discuss the word in its many guises and manifestations. And so an appropriate place to begin is probably at the beginning. In principio et verbo et verbum caro factum est, as any altar boy can tell you. And what that means is, in the beginning was the Word. In the beginning was the Word. And it goes on to say, and the Word was made flesh, which we'll get into that in a little bit of detail later. But this notion that any idea of consciousness, any idea of Godhead, any idea of a human view of a mysterious cosmos begins with the concept of the Word. This is basic to Western civilization. It's also very fundamental to Hindu civilization, where you have Vak. Vak is the Word, the going forth of the Word, as Shabda, sound, these two concepts. Because after all, what language is modulated mouth noise of some sort. Notice how uniquely engineered for this activity we are. I mean, if we had to rely on hand gestures, philosophy would probably never have been invented. We can literally make small mouth noises imbued with meaning or reasonable facsimiles thereof for hours. I'm the living proof of this. And we don't do it in one language, we do it in hundreds of languages. And if you think of language since it first burst upon the scene, there have probably been thousands of languages, each one a unique slice of reality, each one capable of its own special take on the experience of being. And these languages, when they die, they carry with them thoughts unthinkable in any other language, insights unsayable in any other language. And in fact, in living languages, there are capacities untapped, things potentially sayable, but never said. You know, Noam Chomsky talked about this, about the fact that we have this innate ability to recognize billions and billions of sentences. We recognize them as meaningful structures, most of which we have never heard before. This is a great mystery. And I am not, in any sense of the word, religious in any orthodox sense. But I would suggest to you that if we're looking for the thumbprint of God on this world, human language is a good place to begin. There's nothing else like it in this world. And I don't want to rain on the dolphin parade or the dancing bee parade or any of that. That's all very fine, but hey, it ain't Milton. It isn't the same thing as south and south and southward aye we fled till it grew wondrous cold, and ice mast high went floating by as green as emerald. I don't think anybody else does that but human beings. That's our genius. So when you talk about humanness, you're talking about the primacy of language. That's what we are, the talking animal. Homo sapien sapien, the thinking man. And thinking is not worth diddly squat if you can't say what you're thinking. So what we really are the thinking, speaking human being. And this is our curse and our glory. This is our fall and our ascent. This either puts us so far from nature that we can never crawl back onto the bandwagon, or so close to God that we have no need to. And we haven't figured it out yet, exactly what it means to us and what is it for. Cynics say to lie. Language was invented to lie. You know, Winston Churchill once said, "The truth is so precious that she must be accompanied everywhere by a bodyguard of lies." All right, here. So there are a couple of concepts that I want to put in place before I wade out into this. This idea of the word is very interesting. And as you probably know, there is a strain of Jewish mysticism called Kabbalism, which believes that everything that can be known, that can even be, is in the Torah. But obviously, part of the future hasn't happened yet. The Torah is a kind of downloading into books of a universal book that is being read, as it were, by God. And yet these scholars of the Torah say it's already a done deal. It's completed. So when questioned by their students of how is this possible, that the world is made of words and that it's a done deal, and yet we have an illusion of an open future, these Hasids explain that what the future is the part of the word stew that is still scrabbled, and that what the present is the place where the unscrambling meets the scrambled. And as we move toward the end of time, more and more of the letters are unscrambled and their meaning is revealed. So really, existence is more like a book than any other thing that we are familiar with. Life is a story. And in fact, we've never moved beyond that. We have pretended to move beyond it, but we never really have. About 5 years ago, a brilliant young woman named Misha Landau at Boston University wrote a book called Narratives of Evolution. And she argued that great scientific theories reared on a foundation of adamantine truth and male objectivity are in fact nothing more than stories. And she chose to concentrate on the theory of evolution. And she said, this is a great story. The story of a poor but humble primate who leaves his ancestral home on a great journey. And along the way, he meets many obstacles and forms many alliances and has many adventures in his quest for the great treasure difficult to obtain, which is consciousness. And then, of course, consciousness is obtained. And then we get story 2, the story of our conscious adventure, the story that we call history, the story of all the migrations and dreams and inventions and religions and hopes and fears and brutality and nobility that the human species is capable of. Well, what about this? Philosophy comes to the difficult questions last. First, we ask simple questions. What is the world made of? That's a simple question, although it took several thousand years to answer. But it's a simple question compared to questions like, who's asking the question? That's a tricky one. And what is truth? And secondly, and more important, what's so great about it that we should care? And truth is approached through language. It may be contemplated in silence, but that's a private and hence a selfish and an unshared truth. So however much we have to betray truth to communicate it, we are still called to make that sacrifice in order to share what little truth there is that can be known. And so the obligation upon us is an obligation to clear speech. You'll recall in Alice in Wonderland, the caterpillar smoking his hookah says, "Say what you mean and mean what you say. I do." This, I think, is our challenge, because what we mean to say, if we mean to say truth, is something very, very complicated indeed. It's not even clear that we start with enough marbles for the job. Are you still with me here? So if the world is made of language, and if language is most fitted for the telling of a story, then the world must be some kind of a story. Robert Anton Wilson once said an interesting thing. He said, the world is ruled by power elites. You should define a power elite as yourself and your immediate friends. If you define a power elite any way other than that, you have a loser's scenario. And who needs a loser's scenario? How this applies to this, I'm about to figure out before your very eyes. If the world is a story, then it damn sure ought to be a good story, because it's the biggest story there is. All the other stories are embedded in it. They are subsets of it. Well, what makes a good story? Well, I'm of a generation simple-hearted enough to say, number one, a happy ending. I love happy endings. Whenever I hear of tragedy, no matter how lame, chuckle-headed, or maniacal, I always reply with, I love a happy ending. So that's one thing, a happy ending. The second thing is a surprising ending. You don't want to see the ending coming at you from page 220 when you still have 400 pages to go. We all hate that kind of a slow unraveling, I think. So the ending should be happy, and the ending should be sudden and unexpected. These are the elements of a good story. And the plot should unfold like a Swiss watch. On time, under budget, understated, clean, unerring, on the money. That's part of it. The other thing is, if in fact the world is made of language and we are inside a story, then it turns out that aesthetics, Tom touched on this when he talked about style, the dancing diamond, aesthetics is everything. If the story is told badly, it doesn't matter if it's a good story. You can't overlook the language. And I've managed to irritate large numbers of people in what's called the New Edge or the New Age by simply pointing out that there are a lot of half-baked stories, badly told, stylistically flawed, poorly developed characterization, dependence on improbabilities, badly fleshed out background material, poorly researched historical foundations, so forth and so on. These are bad stories, bad art, and God knows there's nothing worse. Well, no, there's one thing worse, but I can't mention it. But bad art is up there, believe me. Okay. My relationship to this has always been a little different from other people who've wanted to be part of the story or tell part of the story. There is well established this concept of the muse. And as I read it, the muse is a finely proportioned young woman in diaphanous gowns who speaks perfect Attic Greek and raises in you the power to speak for her, to reveal, to tell the secrets, to display the mysteries. If you hear a faint quiver of nostalgia in my voice, it's because this isn't what I got. Where I was expecting diaphanous, well-proportioned Attic Greeks, instead I got self-transforming elf machines that look like jeweled, dribbling basketballs. In other words, at the other end of the spectrum of these language-revealing supernatural entities are what I call the tykes, language elves. Language elves. Elves, you will recall, make things. And one of the things they make is riddles. If you ever get trapped by elves, God forbid, probably only intelligence will pull you through into the kind of intelligence that can solve riddles, the kind of riddles that I was unable to solve this afternoon, I'm sorry to say. But yes, language. It has many dimensions. And I'm not going to flog the psychedelic point of view this evening because I think it goes without saying. Or it goes with saying. I'm not sure which. But in any case, over the edge of ordinary words, these words which lie flat in black and white on the printed page, or move invisibly through the air from mouth to ear and back again, over the edge from ordinary words, there seem to be extraordinary words, or we might say hyper-ordinary words, because words have, strangely enough, dimensionality. One of the points that I'm concerned to make here this weekend is that language, great stuff though it is unfinished. It's an unfinished project. It doesn't end with Tom Robbins and Terence McKenna, or Milton, or Shakespeare. These are signposts along the way, because what language wants to be is more palpable, yet more juicy, yet more colorful, yet more present in the world. And I think if you look back over the past 100 years, for example, where we have the evolution, well, let's say 150 years, the invention of photography, of color photography, of stereopticon photography, of black and white film, of color still photography, on and on. In other words, what is happening, and we feel it today with the rise of the internet and virtual reality and so forth and so on, is an ever more explicit condensation of the linguistic enterprise. It's adding dimensions to itself, dimensions of color, of image, of music, of light. Words have all these faceted dimensions. And when we read them off the page, essentially we perform all these operations upon them in our private imaginations. But the private imagination is the atomic unit of the cultural imagination. And the power of the word and the image is felt in our century more strongly than in any other because of the power of technology to move words and images. Someone defined media rather cynically as the power to spread darkness at the speed of light. Well, the criticism of bad language. And the truth, the sad truth of it that makes us laugh is there because we know how betrayed language has become as it ascended in power. Joseph Goebbels is the great despoiler of the word in the 20th century. He worked for Hitler as propaganda minister and invented what he called the big lie, a shocking discovery which many members of the New Age have exploited to the hilt. This is where you just claim something so outlandish that people either clear the hall or they pay their money and stand up for it. The big lie. The lie of advertising, the lie of racism, of sexism, of government. We're surrounded by these lies. And deconstructing them is a process of deconstructing linguistic crimes, essentially. Scapegoating, stereotyping, distorting, misrepresenting, betraying history. These are the crimes against language, and they are essentially, therefore, crimes against the highest and noblest part of the human soul. But I digress. I want to return to this business of the tykes. Otherwise, I'm just probably, I hope, telling you what you already know. But the enterprise of language, I think, is the arrow that points toward our distant destiny and future. And it may not, as James Joyce said, it may not be so far away as you may wish to be congealed. It may be closer upon us than we think. Out of the darkness of the unspoken, inarticulate animal soul came civilization with all its ambiguities and contradictions. Looming now, apparently, is digitalization. And if ever the word is to become flesh, then it must happen in a context in which the flesh becomes word. This is what's happening. It's as though meaning is condensing into matter. Meaning is condensing into matter and then reflecting itself back. I'm convinced, because I can't imagine how it could have happened any other way, that language is a lot older than meaning. Surely that must be so. That we discovered, long before we discovered rational conversation, we discovered that we could play with our mouths and make funny noises for each other's amusement. We still do this with scat singing and glossolalia and nonsense rhymes and this sort of thing. And strangely, meaning adheres where definition is absent. There is still meaning. 'Twas brillig, and the slithy toes did gyre and gimble in the wabe. All mimsy were the borogoves, and the money raths outgrabe. Beware the jabberwock, my son, the jaws that bite, the claws that catch. Beware the jub-jub bird, and shun the Thermius bandersnatch. He took his vorpal sword in hand. Long time the maxim foe he sought, so rested he by the tum-tum tree, and stood a while in thought. And as in uffish thought he stood, the jabberwock with eyes of flame came woofing through the tulgey wood and burbled as it came. 1, 2, 1, 2, and through his vorpal blade went snicker-snack. He left it dead, and with its head he went galumphing back. And hast thou slain the jabberwock? come to my arms, my beamish boy, O frabjous day, Callooh, Calais, he chortled in his joy. 'Twas brillig, and the slithy toves did gyre and gimble in the wabe. All mimsy were the borogoves, and the mony raths outgraved. So there you have it. You see. Language is evocative. What we sense, we later are able to analytically communicate. But the sound there in Jabberwocky, it's the sound which carries it. And I'm convinced that for a long, long time, people amused each other in that fashion and in more radical fashions with complete nonsense syllables. And it was only some late arriving, very nerdish and practical type who said, you know what we could do with this stuff? We could assign a specific object to a specific sound, and then every time I make that sound, you will know to bring me that haunch of mammoth meat or that flagon of fermented mare's milk or whatever the hell it was they were eating. And out of that, then, this agreements about meaning come what are called local languages. And the interesting thing about local languages to me is that they are local. I mean, this is perhaps too obvious to point out, but if you are born into the Amazon, into a tribe in the Amazon, you are born into a different reality than a person born in Maui or Manhattan. Born into a different reality because born into a different language. The first time I went to the Amazon as drug hunter and sometimes butterfly collector, I didn't know enough about botany to make it all stop being just green. That's all it was very green, you know, and I kept commenting on this. Gee, it's very green. And someone said, well, you know what they call it? They call it the big green. Well, clearly these were not botanists. Then the next time I went to the Amazon, I went with botanists. And I learned the plant families, you know, the Malphigaceae, the Myristicaceae, the Zygophalaceae. I learned about melanostomes, and I learned about Orchidaceae, and I learned about epiphytes and saprophytes and all of these things. And these words then flowered before me in the world that I was moving through. And I understood it. I understood it. And it seems to me you can't understand things any other way. People sometimes say to me, how come you use so many big words? The answer is because there's no other way to understand what we're trying to talk about here. It's not obfuscation. It's not obfuscation. People say, well, but don't you think your audiences don't understand you? No, because if a word is spoken by someone who understands what it means, it will be understood by people listening to that person. You know, William Blake said, if the truth can be told so as to be understood, it will be believed. It compels belief if the truth is told so as to be understood. So truth-telling in an understandable fashion is one of the most intimate activities that we can engage in. It builds community. It is truly civilized. And when we betray language, as the Nazis did, as our own politicians do, as advertising does, then that is not civilized. That is the scrabby and gritty behavior of the marketplace and worse. And it dehumanizes. So suddenly then what we're discovering is that our language and our humanness are essentially the same thing. And that care for the project of language, which is my phrase, is care for the project of being, which was Heidegger's phrase. And that's what we're here for, to care for the project of being and to inhabit an enhanced sphere of quality experience. And in order to do that, we have to empower ourselves against the onrushing ambiance of canned, machined, pre-programmed language that we are handed by our society. Instead of consuming that stuff, we have to create. This is why Tom is such a wonder to me, because he says things that are very funny and very apt, and as far as I can tell, never said before. The pity is that this is so rare a thing. It's something that when you do it, you reclaim your humanness. You take back your mind. Stereotypic thinking is not thinking at all. That's the whole point. And ideological goods, the shoddy ideological goods being sold in the intellectual marketplace, have all been pinched, prodded, and tried on in the dressing rooms so many times that any person of good taste and sensitive nostril will turn and move the other way. A culture cannot evolve any faster than its language. Ideas first come, change first comes, revolution first comes in the form of language. I can remember two very distinct moments, and I don't want any hissing or catcalling or any of that as I bare my soul and tell you that this was me at one time in one place. But I can remember being in Kathmandu in must have been 68, and finally the Newsweek arrived with the news of women's liberation. And I had to sit down and consider. I had been in the New Left. We always let our women make coffee for us. Weren't they liberated? What was the problem here? And I read this article through, and the light dawned. And I realized that this issue had been completely submerged, this enormous issue, the inappreciation, the subjugation, the misperception of women, had been entirely buried by habits of language, and that it took this outside stimulus to put it over the top, to bring me to confront something I had never considered before. Well, that was many years ago. But as recently as 5 or 6 years ago, somebody spoke a phrase in my ear I had never heard before: Hawaiian sovereignty. It seemed preposterous. It seemed inconceivable. Inconceivable. That's the key concept. In other words, it seemed beyond the pale of language. It seemed like a phrase from a surrealist tract or something like that. But people kept saying it, explaining it, adumbrating it, working out its implications, and it goes from being inconceivable to inevitable because of the quality of the articulation, if it is inevitable. Dreams don't happen unless they are clearly articulated. Dreams that are clearly articulated are pretty much on the road to inevitability. A long time ago, I discovered, and some people would say to my great detriment, that if you can make it work in language, it'll work. You don't have to go to the workbench. If it works as a concept, then it's all over except the stuff that the engineering and technical staff will take care of. They'll grind the parts and fit them together and put it together in 3D. But it first has to work in language. And now we stand, technically, socially, on the brink of a purer world of language than we have ever even conceived of before. This same aha principle that applies to Hawaiian sovereignty and women's rights also applies to virtual reality. This is one of those ideas where on the first pass you think they're kidding, and it slowly dawns on you they're not kidding. This entire culture is on the brink of going virtual. Actually, if you pull back to the old extraterrestrial viewpoint, we've been virtual a long time, because language is the primary programming language of virtual reality. When you move into a city and crown a king and announce a religious hierophany and begin building temples and painting murals, you're inside a virtual reality. We have always defined civilization that way. But now we're about to move from the virtual reality of highways, bricks, mortar, heavy materials that cost a lot of money to move around, to a world almost magical in comparison. Someone pointed out to me, the difference between a 10-story building and a 100-story building in virtual reality is 1-0. That's the difference. So the long journey through language has carried us to the brink of a domain of pure language and a world made of pure language. And I wonder what kind of world it will be. I'm Platonist enough, and there aren't enough of us around, I think, to believe that the good and the true and the beautiful are the same thing. But truth is hard to know, and goodness is hard to recognize. But beauty is the easy path in, because we all recognize and respond to beauty. So the challenge, I think, is, and I don't mean beauty in some late romantic la-la kind of sense, I mean savage beauty, beauty that grabs you by the lapels and breathes in your face. We're on the brink of being able to show each other our imaginations. This is what we've been doing through story and dance and theater and rhyme and meme and so forth. But we're about to take an enormous step deeper into what it means to be a linguistic creature. It's the opportunity to be poets. It's the opportunity to be poets. Who's speaking here, for God's sake? It must be an ancestor lurking back there. The other aspect of this, which I raise somewhat reluctantly because I don't fully understand it myself, but the longer I live, the more apparent to me it is that the world model that we inherit from science, which, let me sketch it for you just very briefly, it's that this is a typical planet around a typical star in a typical galaxy undergoing typical physics and chemistry. It's all an accident. We're damn lucky to be here. Asking why doesn't make any sense. Asking how is good scientific method. And most specifically, there's an absence of meaning in the scientific, ultimate meaning, human meaning in the scientific and modern viewpoint. Sartre said nature is mute. Maybe the most perverse statement ever made by a philosopher who escaped hanging. Nature is mute. Tain't so, folks. French eggheads who hang out in smoky cafes may be mute, but nature, or deaf, as the case may be, but nature is not mute. The longer I live, the more I meet people, the more I hear people's stories, the more I tell my stories to them, I'm convinced that those lights in the sky at night are not distant suns burning with planets around them light years away. They're background. We are inside a work of art of some sort. This is a book or a play or a movie of some sort. Who's directing? Or as I find myself asking more and more, my God, who writes this stuff? I don't know. But I think that the task of each one of us is to come to awareness of this situation, because I really believe that salvation is an act of intellectual apprehension. This is heresy. You know, it's supposed to be an act of moral goodness, but I refuse to believe that because I would condemn myself to eternal damnation with that story. So I prefer to think that salvation is an intellectual act of cognition. And what you cognize is the, oh my God, I'm a character in a book. I'm a character in a book. Now, once you know that, it's very important to figure out what character? In what book? Am I a character in a book who appears only once on page 220 to open a car door for a main character as they whisk into an important meeting that is pivotal to the unfolding of this story? Or is this the Terence McKenna story? Very important to figure out, because once you figure out where you are in the story, if you don't like where you are in the story, what your character has been handed, you can begin to move them into a different part of the story, bring them forward, make them more central. And you might think then that the goal is to become the central character in the story. This is not the goal. If you do that, you will undergo whatever fate is being prepared for the central character in the story. And too many stories sacrifice their central characters for me to be confident that that's a smooth move. I don't think so. I think what you want to become is the author of the story. And if you become the author of the story, you will be able to reach back into the plot and by that means save your character. Save your character. And how do you become the author? The great genius of authors. It's why a mediocre author is worth more than a master guru or yogi. The great thing about an author is that he or she can place themselves in other people's minds. It's the highest form of truth. And being able to write it is the highest form of spiritual accomplishment, I think, because it proves that you are truly without ego. If you're a good writer, if you're a bad writer, you will write badly and critics will tell you and the whole thing will come to naught. And this is not an issue of publication. We all preach or pay lip service to the idea of being able to translate ourselves into other people's point of view, to stand in the other guy's shoes, to see it from the other point of view. But only the successful novelist really achieves this. And it's a trick of language. We each have a unique language. And I cannot be the dictator or his mistress as long as I have the language of Terence McKenna. That may do for the narration or the epilogue, but somehow I have to translate myself into the minds of these people. Well, now, with these new technologies, what we are on the brink of is being able to share our imaginations, being able to show each other, as we show an outstretched hand, our souls. Because what our souls are our hopes and our fears and our dreams and our fantasies and the physical detritus of our lives that is meaningful to us, the drawings, the cards, the small gifts exchanged, the pebble from that distant beach, the butterfly wing found in the windowsill of a foreign hotel. All of these things, we are going to share them. And, you know, there's a question which hovers over us, all of us, always has, back to the first campfire where we roasted the haunch of an antelope. And that question is man good? What are we if we are free to be whatever we wish to be? You know, de Sade had a fairly depressing answer to this question. I don't think we want to go down that path, but we should be aware of it. I think that we have locked within us, each and every one, a metamorphic potential to become a linguistic angel of some sort, to actually take flight into our highest aspirations. This would probably be the appropriate place to quote James Joyce, who said of life and death, and speaking of the red light district of Dublin, which is called Moycane, Joyce said, "Here in Moycane we flop on the seamy side, but up in the end, prospector, you sprout all your worth and you woof your wings. Woof, 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 your wings. And those wings are woofed and warped and wefted and woven out of language. Without that, what you have here is a carnivorous hunting monkey. With language, what you have is a monkey with one foot in heaven. And the Word seeks to be made flesh. And I think that process is well along. But the flesh seeks concomitantly to return to the essence of the Word, the primal purity. So it's like a descent into the world of matter by spirit, now called the Word or the Logos, same in Demotic Greek, Logos. The descent of the Word into matter, to manifest in the animal body, to, good philosophical word out of Husserl, to adumbrate itself, to work all of its changes. In other words, to exfoliate, to be all that it could be, to say all that it could say, to tell all that it could tell, and then to return to its awesome, hidden, original source, carrying its vehicle, its privileged vehicle, with it. And we are that privileged vehicle. We are only as human as our language, and our history is only as bright as our metaphors, and our reality is only as good as the puns that we can make about it. So thank you very much. It seems to me that what's happening in the area of knowledge is that we are actually figuring out how the visible world works, that the world of light, energy,
atomic structure, so forth and so on, at an almost explosive rate. Human understanding is flowing into these areas. I mean, you have only to read Science News or Scientific American to feel the immense excitement. Every branch of science is in revolution. And then you turn to something like archaeology. It's all revolution everywhere. I mean, because suddenly integrated information processing techniques and ever more subtle analytical techniques, they can actually answer questions. We're getting very good at figuring stuff out, so that, you know, on very little evidence, we can actually reconstruct with computers the trade system of the Maya, or the gross national product of and stuff like this. So it seems to me what's happening is we're caught up in some kind of explosion of understanding, that is where understanding is happening so fast now in so many areas that the entire historical experience is being permeated with a sense of revelation. And ultimately, you know, it's revelation of the nature of being. And people like Ken Wilber, Stuart Kaufman, I don't know, there's a lot of people involved in different areas. There are very few people. I saw some very interesting papers recently by Stuart Hameroff and Roger Penrose on quantum mechanical models for the storage of memory and consciousness. And these are guys who try to make nuts and bolts models of how the mind might work at the quantum mechanical level. It's very, very exciting, and all this stuff is being integrated. So my prediction is that over the next 15 years or so, there will just be, in the areas of technology, general systems, mathematical modeling of reality, all that, a sense of endless revelation and discovery, leading probably to a completely different model of reality. I mean, it may be that, in a sense, we're about to be invaded by ourselves from the future, bringing back ideas that will be as shattering to us as the Spanish conquest was to the empire of the Aztecs. I mean, we've really shot our wad. We think the Aztecs represent some kind of horrific cultural bankruptcy because they threw 10,000 people a day off their tops of their pyramids at the height of the cult of human sacrifice. But in fact, you know, we accept 150,000 automobile deaths a year, millions of deaths from pollution, bad drugs, so forth and so on. I mean, we do appear to be a society that has just set itself on fire. But this understanding thing is reaching some kind of culmination. And the payoff in the natural sciences from understanding how something works is that you then can make other things which work on that same principle. And what kind of technologies you can make based on an understanding of consciousness and information flow and this kind of thing, we have no idea. I mean, it is pure science fiction. In a few years, literally, I don't think we will even recognize ourselves. Culture is becoming more psychedelic. You only have to have, Lenin felt, 11% of the population to completely restructure the society. And what I see is that the technology is being designed, the way our urban environments are being designed, the way fashion and music and all these things are developing, is people are psychedelic who don't even know it, because they think it's a social style. They think it has something to do with Paisleys. So I talked last night about idioviruses being spread through the population. Well, one of these viruses is clearly this, what I call the psychedelic meme. You all know what a meme is, right? A meme is, a gene is the smallest unit of heredity. A meme is the smallest unit of ideology. So there can be trivial memes, such as Madonna's pregnancy, and there can be memes like National Socialism or Marxism or quantum physics. But these memes compete with each other like organisms in an environment. And the more adaptable ones, the ones that confer advantage if you accept them, stick around and survive. And so the psychedelic meme is now incredibly powerful in fashion, advanced computer design and software architecture, ecological politics, and urban design. All those things are very, very psychedelically touched. But this, you're not supposed to mention this because official culture mitigates against it. One of the things that would be nice is for people to just use the word more often, instead of trying to tailor some synthetic word that doesn't raise the hackles of the ignorant. I mean, I've heard objections to the word psychedelic, usually that it has too much political content. My reply to that is, you got a problem with that? That comes with the turf, often distributed fractally. In other words, it occurs in clumps that are clumps of clumps of clumps, and its distribution is often Gaussian, which is a subset of fractals. That's where you have big things evenly spaced with little things evenly spaced between them with even littler things, and so forth. It stands to reason if information were like that, then you could get enlightened anywhere or nowhere. You could be lost or found anywhere, including in the same place, which is, I suppose, worth remembering. All human beings strive for completion. They like closure, even though it may not be that good for them. So at every level of culture, no matter how thin the data was, some people took it and would construct a myth of closure. And all myths are this. Well, in this Greek cultural line of descent and tradition, the idea that mathematics was somehow primary was there very early on. I mean, it is amazing when you think that in 500 BC, or actually before, the Greeks were stretching gut strings, plucking them, cutting them in two, plucking them again, and studying the mathematical ratios between them. I mean, everybody else was painting themselves blue and offering blood sacrifice to the sun god, and these people were into this. It's an aberration. It's not, I'm not saying it's good, I'm just marveling at how far from the general style of human approaches to reality that is. And it builds the faith then in mathematical modeling. And indeed, mathematics has always given, at any stage of cultural development, the most precise models were mathematical. When Ptolemaic astronomy was the best thing around for describing the planets, it was in fact fairly serviceable. And no one understands. I mean, I think the fact that no one understands what I'm about to describe indicates probably where the blind spot in Western epistemology comes from. But no one understands why nature is describable by mathematics. This seems it seems difficult to discover the connection. Mathematics exists only in the human mind. These are abstract relationships among abstract entities. It's as far removed from, the here and now as anything possibly could be. And so far as we know, no other animal has stumbled into any kind of awareness of this. And in fact, many human groups have no concept above two except many. But in our own case, we've gone quite far down this road. Well, then, why is it so congruent with nature, not only nature as given, but the frontiers of discovery in the natural world, at the edge of the universe, in the realm of the supercooled, in the realm of the quanta, so forth and so on? I think if we knew the answer to this, it would reveal some mystery about our own being that we've overlooked. Apparently, we have within us the capacity for the revelation of the truest truth anyone has ever known, but it lies in this realm of abstraction and then mapping it back onto the world of experience. A.N. Whitehead, that I've mentioned a couple of times, is the most mathematical of 20th century philosophers. He wrote Principia Mathematica with Bertrand Russell. And they probably would have done a lot of good work together had Bertie and Evelyn Whitehead not found each other in a way that A.N. couldn't handle. But in any case, his metaphysics is very mathematically secure. Well, then when you look at his theory of knowledge, what is Whitehead saying about how the universe is put together? He's saying that below the level of atoms, below the level of particles, and this is the most mathematical philosopher in the 20th century, he says there lies the realm of actual occasions, or nexus of feeling. Feeling is the deepest level of reality in Whitehead's mathematical ontology. So I think that, we're pushed here towards some kind of modified Platonism. There is some kind of trans-mundane realm that is apprehended through this fractal hyperdimensional organ called the imagination. And in the realm of the imagination lie these perfect objects, and they are somehow the organismic manifestation of the divine. And as deep as we can know this side of the yawning grave. And then the confirmation of their veracity lies in the fact that the world of natural experience is a set of resonant echoes of these interior images. That's the Platonism of it. And then this, you see, explains why the psychedelic experience has a role to play, because it amplifies the imagination, and in so doing, it becomes a revelation about the structure of nature. And this is a very healing cycle of realizations. At every stage of this cycle of realizations, alienation is overcome and defeated and pushed back.